Okay, so welcome to our Block 1 Week 2 lecture. We're going to be going into our imprinting step this week. So it is our step 1. So we have some of our foundational stuff established with our dog. And now we like how their hunt is looking. We think that we have, hey Savannah, we think that we have a pretty solid foundation as far as our play mechanics and all of that stuff. And we're ready to introduce them to odor. And this is a step for you guys as well that might already have your dog on odor. This is a step that we can go back to if we're retraining a little bit or we just want more clarity in our dog's understanding of odor. I have gone back to this odor pays box, dopamine box stage several times with all of my adult dogs. It's a great step to kind of clarify things for them, and you can actually make it quite challenging for those dogs that are doing really well with it by just adding a little bit more handler proofing or handler distraction and seeing can they stay at odor. So I encourage you guys to work on this through the week, even if your dog is more advanced and they already have somewhat of an indication or you're pretty happy with how their indication is. A lot of times we'll go to do these seminars and we have people that are like, oh, my dog's been doing this for years. I don't think I need this. And then when we really start kind of testing it and trying things with the dogs, we can see that there's a lot of holes in that foundation a lot of times, and a lot of stuff that can be readdressed and looked at from this step 1, and then brought, and you can move as quickly as you want to with the dog once they show you that they're having that understanding. So before we start, do you guys have any questions related to anything maybe from last week or the Q&A or anything before we jump into this new stuff? Yes, Brian.
Are we going to touch much on when we talked about imprinting the odor as far as doing a cocktail versus doing an individual scent?
That's a great question. I didn't really present anything on that for this class, but I will tell you guys, I'll have to see. Remind me next week for the Q&A. We'll go over that in more detail.
Okay.
But basically, you do not want to do a cocktail. And I encourage any of you guys, if you're really, this is like your big hobby or you're doing it professionally a little bit or whatever, we have a super awesome lecture by Nathan Hall in our on our online platform. That lecture by Nathan and also the one by Paul Tiedemann is amazing. And they get in a little bit of kind of the more so the chemistry of how odor works. But basically, when you mix odors like that, when you do combos like that, the dogs take away a lot of different stuff. And we don't know exactly what they're taking away. And so when you're introducing, say we start our dog on birch, anise, and clove, a cocktail of that. So the first thing we have to think about is one of those more overpowering than the others? Because if that's the case, then that's the information our dog's taking away. So if birch is the one that's more overpowering, we think we're training our dog on anise as well, but they're really not picking that up. They're really paying attention to the really strong smell. And then for some dogs, and this is something that, science-wise, like we don't even fully know, but, there's a thought that dogs have a preference of odors just like we do, right? Like some people might really like the smell of, a pumpkin spice candle, and somebody else would hate that smell. So dogs have preferences like that as well. Cameron talked about it a little bit on the Talking Scent page at one point. It was kind of an interesting conversation that came out of it. Just different people saying, things that they've noticed with their dog. Like a lot of people's dogs seem to kind of have an aversion to like anise. So there's different things like that can kind of come out of some of this stuff. But so as kind of a general rule, we like to train everything out separately. And then I will start working combos with my dogs when they're, a little bit later on, they're proficient on all the odors, and I'll start introducing those combos because that is something we're going to have to deal with in trial. And I do want my dogs to understand that. But as far as the imprinting, I want them to be super solid on birch, super solid on anise, clove, and whatever other odors I might need. But I want to do all of that separate. And so what I'll do is when I introduce a new odor, I'm going to take my dog all the way back to this beginning step with the new odor. But at that point, they kind of know the game and they go through it pretty quickly. The other kind of interesting component to think about with our sport stuff is we don't actually know, are the dogs responding to the additive to the essential, or the additive to the actual like base oil? Or they may even be responding to a degree to the actual oil that is holding, our birch, anise, and clove chemical. So in that sense, like a lot of people will do the cocktail method and then be like, yeah, look, my dog, right away, then my dog can find all these ones even separated out. But a lot of times what we see in that is the dog is just understanding a context. So it's not necessarily that the dog's like, oh yes, I totally understand anise. They're just going, wow, this is a really strong odor in the space. And it has these other components that I'm also used to. Maybe it's in a tin, maybe it's on Q-tips. And so they respond to it more based on that context, but we look at it as success in our cocktail method. So I'll kind of get into that a little bit more detail when we do our Q&A, because there's a little bit more to it. But if you guys get a chance, I would recommend those lectures that we have. They're really great information. But yes, so for our method, I highly recommend to do everything one at a time. Don't do combos. Do everything one at a time, and then you will start introducing combos as your dog is advancing through trial, because you do need to be able to show them that, and they need to understand that. But when you put different odors together, it's not quite the same as the dog just going, "Ooh, this is birch and anise together." The dog is like, it's almost like a new odor that you're training them on. That combo is a separate type of smell versus just the two separated out. But that's a great question. I should have put that in here. I'm going to do that for my next, because that's, something that everyone needs to know, right? Before you get going, what should I do? So yeah, Lisa Marie, did you have a question?
It wasn't really a question, but it reminded me of a couple of years ago. I had a dog that I was doing an ORT on, and seriously, like I barely trained her on on anise. She was really great on birch, could find it anywhere. And clove, I did okay. Anise, I think I did twice, and I was like, okay, I just wasted my money signing up for all the odors. No, she hit all of them. Like, And so when you said, are they reacting to the oil or are they reacting to the actual scent? It just made me think that, because I always wondered, it was only an ORT, so it wasn't like she had a bunch of, discriminatory
experience.
Yeah. Well, and also that she didn't have like a bunch of competing odors, all boxes are empty except for the hot one.
Right.
But I always wondered, did she just pass that because she just picked out the one that had a smell, period?
Yeah, a smell. It was actually, so we were working with all of these police dogs at this tactical conference, and I was we were introducing all of them to a wheel. So these are pretty experienced dogs, but we're introducing them to doing a scent wheel. And the dogs were doing really well. So I had distractors in every single place in the scent wheel, and then they would have their hot one. But then at one point, the dogs got so used to the distractors, and I was mixing out the distractors. I had pizza crust. I had like peanut butter cookies. I had all sorts of challenging distractors in there. But at one point, there was a handful of dogs that kept hitting the blank one. So no distractor. And so sometimes it's almost like whatever is really different can catch the dogs off guard. So they even notice like just that difference between like all of these are really strong, different smells, but then this one is nothing. And the dogs were like, I don't know, this is really different than anything. And some dogs would go either have heavy interest there where we'd be like, well, we got to check what that one was. Or a couple dogs even went into like full indication. And so obviously they're not indicating on nothing, right? But they're just seeing that huge context shift or that huge kind of signal to that one thing that's so different in the space. And Cameron just did a YouTube video talking about context, because we get a lot of people too that, you know, will get like bomb handlers and drug handlers that train together, and they'll have their odors in the same space. And then the bomb dog will find the drugs and they'll be like, oh my God, I got to start proofing my dog off of finding cocaine. No, you don't. It's more so that the dog is finding this strong context that is similar to how their normal hides are, you know, hidden and stuff. So the dog finds it and goes, okay, well, it's in, you know, a lot of times they use like canvas bags instead of like tins like us. So they'll be like, the dog will find it and go, well, it's in a canvas bag. It's the only really strong smell in the space. It has human odor by it. It's hidden in this weird way. So a lot of times the dogs will go, you know, this is a 2 out of 3 right here. It's meeting a lot of my criteria for what my odor is. The only thing it's lacking is what the actual odor is, right? So those are the things that we have to keep in mind, that context. You know, we're lucky in nose work. We really don't have any, like, there's no distracting odors that they put out in the sense of like a chemical. Like anything new to the space is either going to be like food distractor or maybe a toy that they bring in. And those things are a little bit easier to kind of make sure we're proofing off of, as opposed to just like a novel, strong smell to the area. I mean, it definitely still pays to put out different things like that. So for example, when we're doing proofing, we'll put out, you know, gloves and different things like that, different, you know, tins, so that the dogs are learning that the only relevant thing is their odor, and not the odor vessel or these other odors that might kind of come into it, which we'll get more into when we're doing starting our odor discrimination. So in our next lecture. But yeah, so that context of like, wow, this is a strong odor in the space, you know, that's huge for the dogs, I think.